Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a great webinar planned for you all about using bots and Microsoft Teams for purchasing. So it can be made a lot easier than it usually is for many organizations. Certainly helps with user adoption and many other use cases. But before we dive into it, I do have a couple of items I just want to go over with everyone. First of all, we're going to keep it high level today. We're going to try to keep it short. So if you do have any questions or you want to really dive in deeper and talk more about your specific use case, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to have a conversation with you and get a little bit more specific with that. Also, we will be recording this webinar. So if you need to reference it back, we'll be sending the recording out to everyone who's registered. And we'll also be uploading this to YouTube as well as our website. So you're all covered there. And lastly, we would love to hear from you. So if you have questions as we're going through, don't be shy. Go ahead and pop those questions in that question box there. And without any further ado, now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Ryan Stefani. He is our solutions architect here at Crow Canyon, and he'll be showcasing our NITRO purchasing solution for you today. So without any further ado, Ryan, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Krista. All right, let me switch over presenter to me. Make sure I share my screen here. Yeah, let's do this one. Okay. Krista, you can see this okay?
Sure can. Yep.
Okay, cool. All righty. So purchasing. There's kind of a few different ways in which we talk about purchasing here internally. One is the full process. I guess air quotes full process. That's one of the things like I want to highlight here is that purchasing is very dependent upon the organization that we work with. You don't need to see the webinar screen. And everyone's different. You know, like I even see like a few existing customers attending this meeting. So, you know, for them, their purchasing requirements may be different from yours. So I think that's kind of the main thing I want to get into first is that, you know, the information we capture related to a purchase request and how we process the purchase request, how it gets through to the approval process may be completely different for one company than it is for the other. Most likely it is, right? And I'll talk about how we can, you know, accommodate that and accomplish that on the back end. But first, it's the process, right? One is start to finish, okay? A request is submitted all the way through the receival of items. The second is the request is submitted, we route through the approval process, and then it links to some other tool set, an ERP system, right? Pushes and pulls information from that ERP system into the SharePoint site, which then becomes the system of truth to interact back to the end users, right? I think it comes down to, you know, do you have anything? Really, it comes down to two different options. The first one being kind of full process. Most of those people that we talk to or deal with are using paper-based forms for purchasing, right? Like passing a form around or emailing a form around. The second is they maybe have an ERP in place and that ERP is expensive from a user perspective, you know, adding new users in and having those licenses be tied to a named account, that can get pricey. So the goal here is to use Office 365, SharePoint, to be able to submit requests, track requests, and then tie into the backend department or the backend ERP, or like I said, you know, be able to track the whole process start to finish. So that's the two different options I'm going to be talking about today when talking about purchasing. Now let's talk about a little bit about architecture. I'll keep it quick, promise. This is a SharePoint site, right? So it's in my demo site right now, you know, crowcanyon.sharepoint.com/PR. All of this information is going to live in your SharePoint tenancy. So everything from a data perspective is a SharePoint list or a SharePoint library living in your own SharePoint sites in your own tenant. So there's no like physical data leaving your tenancy. It's all managed and maintained in your environment, which gives us the ability to go in and make the tool specific to you guys, like I mentioned earlier. And we do that with this tool set called NITRO Studio, right? NITRO Purchase Request, NITRO Studio. NITRO Studio was originally intended to be an info path replacement, right? I don't know if anyone remembers InfoPath and SharePoint Designer, but those were old on-prem tools, and those were not created in 365 when it was created some 10 years ago. 10 years? I can't remember. And then recently they rolled out the Power Platform, which can be used. Okay, you know, like a Power Platform is an option. The reason that we use NITRO or created NITRO, sorry, get a little water. So I think there's some limitations around the Power Platform. One being support, right? Like a $1 trillion company trying to troubleshoot your purchasing workflow doesn't always get the best feedback. Secondly, is like the costing methodology around the per user pricing, just like I talked about with the ERP systems. And third is having a flow tied to a user, right? Like let's say Krista is developing our purchase request workflow and Krista is out of the office for a month, 3 weeks, and something happens. And we need to be able to have access to her account to go in and change the purchase request flow or form. That's not really viable when talking about scalability from a long-term perspective. So what we do is we've tied everything specifically to the list, right? So when I'll give you a peek here at the forms tool. I don't want to spend too much time here because I'll get lost in the weeds. Put you guys to sleep maybe, but from the forms perspective, you can see I opened it up and I selected the purchase request form, the purchase request list. And that gives me the ability to edit the end user facing form, which we'll talk about in a second, or the back end form, right? So now I have the autonomy to come in and make changes to the tool after the fact. All of these, like I said, are tied to SharePoint lists, SharePoint columns. We can create, we can move, we can retain based on personal preference. Now, most folks use our services to get them up and running on the tool. SharePoint can be fickle, you know, permissions can be fickle. So I think, you know, a lot of people use our services to get them up and running, but it does give you the autonomy to take over after the fact. Okay. 2 options, full process, submit request to receival of items, from request approval to integration with an ERP system. NITRO Studio gives you the autonomy to go in and make changes to your SharePoint site where this lives. And then that brings us to the feature set, the functionality. Okay, the actual application, the demo. So what happens is that when, you know, we work through your requirements, we set up your form, right? And essentially we have an end user facing form. Portal, Teams page, right? Teams app, where they can come in and submit their purchase request. What's today, the 22nd? And then all of the metadata that I have on my current cover sheet is going to match metadata associated to your guys' requirements, right? What type of purchase is it? What department does it fall in, right? What's the reason, what's the business justification, you know, X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And then finally, what are you purchasing? So these are just examples. And within the purchasing line items, you have the ability to add multiple, as well as give them available items to purchase, right? Oh, yeah. iPhone 6s. We're a few years behind apparently on the iPhone. Might need to update that. Or they can free type in, you know, select vendors, you know, free type in their own item, right? Etc. They can attach quotes. They can give you a cost. And at the end of the day, we're going to present you a form that can have multiple line items with things available that you want to make available for purchase, or you want them to free type, as well as any metadata that could be factored into the routing of the approval process. Hey, Krista is the manager for marketing. All marketing requests should go to Krista. Hey, Ryan runs sales. All sales requests should go to Ryan for approval, right? Hey, if it's over $10,000, it skips them and it goes straight to Scott. So essentially what we're doing with this form, and why I talked about the forms design tool to begin with, is because we want to make sure that these columns match what you guys want, so that when they hit submit for approval and it feeds into the back end of the application, we're triggering the correct approval process. Now from their side, they're going to get the green check marks, the warm and fuzzies that the request has been submitted. And what happens now in backend, the AP side, the processing side, is not only do you have your dashboard to work out of, I'll get into in a sec, but it's querying this list in the admin section called approval levels. And basically it's a matrix that we've created to make sure that we find that right person, like I talked about. Is it department based? Is it type of purchase? Is it stepped levels? Is it based on the amount, right? And based on those factors, it's gonna assign a task to the correct approver. In this case, hopefully me, right? Now, any content captured in the form like I talked about, right? Like, you know, you wanna have your columns and your drop downs. Maybe you don't want type of purchase, maybe you don't want department, that's fine. Whatever you want to capture here is what we're going to route for approval on, right? So this is where, you know, that content becomes so important. Now you can start to see how it all connects together, right? From the form design or from the column creation to the form design to querying the list to what we present to the end user. It all ties together to make sure that the correct information is accounted for on the front end, and that information is then routed to the correct approver on the back end. Now as an approver, where am I? Now as an approver, I am going to get a notification to say, hey, you need to approve this, right? So internally, going back to the AP side, you're going to see it come in, right? Ryan submitted 10 laptops. And then there's a approval request that went out to James and to Ryan, right? So what I get is I get assigned the task, and then I could come in and I could theoretically update the task. Most people don't, to be honest. Most people don't come in and complete tasks. I love completing tasks. It like scratches the itch for me. Most folks don't. Most folks like to do it one of two ways. First, it's through email, right? Hold on, helps if I show the right one. Where you can see the items, right? That was requested. This, that, or the other, total cost, who submitted it, and then you can actually make an approval decision from the body of the email, right? This is approved. No, this is approved. This is approved, right? And it ties back to that task, right? It all writes back to that task. Secondly, the more popular one is I guess a bot would be the right word, an adaptive card. It's a notification that's going to your Teams environment, right? And this is specifically to the person who needs to approve it. So I'm logged in as, you know, what is it, CC sales demo, right? So it's found me, right, based on the name here in the list, and it's created a task for me to come in and approve this purchase request, right? So essentially, whether it's through Teams or through email or through the task itself, we just want to make sure that this gets approved by all the appropriate people, and we track their comments associated with that purchase request, right? Comes in, hits the right person, they approve it one way or another, and now from a tracking perspective, I can see when they approved it, what they said when they approved it, how they approved it, right? And I have full auditing associated to this, right? Okay. Once it's approved. Now, I will say before that, due date. You can see this a little late, right, a month ago on this one. We can notify the approvers, so we can take a little bit of the, you know, I think there's always a little bit of like hesitancy around climbing all over someone to complete a task. And I get it, you know, like I don't want to have to yell at you to do stuff. And, you know, I understand that. So what we've done is we've built in due date or notifications around due date. So you don't necessarily have to, right? You can notify them as aggressively as you choose. I think every 2 minutes coming on the pending due date, a little aggressive, right? But it takes away that need for one person to come in and see the due dates and see what's pending, as opposed to just automating it, right? Like, hey, you need to get this done, you need to get this done, you need to get this done, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And there's my notifications going off. Okay. Once it's approved, actually, why don't we look at one that's been approved? There we go. Now, once it's approved, here's where the split can happen, right? I mean, this is a very effective like front end request submission and approval process, right? We've gone through the form submitting and all the approvals and the various notifications, right? Here they are. Now here is where we can leverage our workflow tool to say like, hey, once it's been approved, kick it over to the ERP system right now. And if one of you, if some of you are like, hey, it's paper-based and we don't have a ERP or we're not tracking it that way, bear with me, I'll get to that in a sec. But for those that do have a back-end ERP system, what we can do is we have kind of piggybacking on the conversation earlier around like Power Automate and maybe the pricing there. We do have the ability to invoke web services from NITRO Studio. So basically you can create an API to that tool set. I think we've done it with, the big ones are NetSuite and SAP's ERP system, the name escapes me, and QuickBooks. Those are the three that have been the most prominent, but basically a push and pull to that database. Now what I've described, very high level, gives you the ability to get information back and forth. Now, in more intricacies, we've done a lot more regarding the integration. We've done things like we pulled in vendors, right, on the request. We pulled in accounting codes. We pulled in, or we've done integrations with asset tracking, right? So all of these lists that could be just static in this case, maybe even categories, can also be tied to that database. Right, so it's not just a standalone SharePoint site and not a standalone ERP system. It is actually a connection between the two. So you do have that ability to push and pull, sync the information back and forth. Where am I? Here. And then once, nope, here. And then once, you know, in the ERP system, it's, you know, it's processed, the PO is created, and, you know, the items are received. You can push information, like I was saying, back into the SharePoint site so end users can be updated on the status of their requests, right? I think this is always the difficult part as well. Like, oh, hey, the item shipped, I need Ryan to come in and update that he got the items, right? I need Ryan to come in and update or said that it was received, or I need to let him know that, you know, it's on order or it's been, you know, reconciled and it's being delivered to him. So the SharePoint, then the purchasing portal becomes a system of truth for the end user as well. So it gives them a bit of interconnectability between that ERP system and the SharePoint purchase request tool for approaching it. Now, for those that want to track this, completely within inside of the SharePoint system, is we can create purchase orders as a part of this workflow as well. So once it's approved, right, once we go through the approval process, a PO is created. We'll do this one right here. And I will say just real quick, all these different dashboards I'm showing, these are just list views, statuses, right? To be ordered, to be reconciled, open, right? Ordered. These will be specific to your guys's requirements as well. Just kind of give you an idea of what information can be displayed. Now, the PO aspect of it is essentially just, well, tracking the status, the order status, right? Now you can do things like tie the original request to it, add invoice information, put in ship to information, which will be important here in a second, right? But more or less, we're tracking the status of the order and the receival of the items. So there's two ways to handle that. There's overall updating the whole status, right? Like, oh, hey, it's on order, it's shipped from vendor. Again, drop down specific to you guys. As well as tracking the line items individually, right? Let's say Amazon, right? Everyone's favorite thing to order on now, super easy. And everything comes in different boxes. You know, like, hey, I got this item, but I don't have the 10 desktops or whatever, laptops, let's call them. So you can update each individual item independently of each other, right? So I got one. So then, you know, I partially fulfilled the PO in this case. It updates the status for me as I've received the item, right? And now we can see overview like, hey, this has been received, this has been partially fulfilled. What's also nice about this is that you can track if the same line item is coming in different orders, right? Maybe I got 5 in one shipment, I'm getting 5 on another. Helps too, because you're gonna have a full audit log of who updates that and when, right? I see that I got 5, been partially received. Okay, when did that happen? Oh, well, it looks like Ryan marked them as these 5 received at, you know, on Wednesday at 11:20. So you do have visibility and the ability to track the line items at a more granular level. And my favorite thing to do is, yeah, I got all 10, but it's like, hey, dummy, you already got 5, right? So it does give us a little bit of flexibility to say, no, we want to make sure that we can track at that granular level. I would say, not flexibility. The permission structure is stringent, so we can track at that granular level to say, yep, these 5 were received then, these 5 were received then. Maybe they were a minute apart, maybe they were 2 days apart. You can see when that happened. Now, the physical creation of the purchase order is always an interesting conversation when talks with customers. There's some ways that we can do it. Essentially, it comes down to my favorite tool in NITRO Studio. It's this print manager. And for those who are familiar or use SharePoint often, printing in SharePoint can be kind of it's a huge pain. So what we have done is we've created a rich text print template, or rich text print template, yeah, HTML print template, to pull information from the purchase order into this PDF. I've also, we put in a header, some information, etc. Some people use it out of the box, well, no, yeah, it's fine, I just need a document. Now, some folks have made this uniquely their own, but it does give you the ability to come in and, did I open that? No, I didn't. Come in and configure this template specific to you guys, right? So it gives you that ability to do so. Okay. And you can email it right from here. It's kind of nice. You can send it to someone, right? Outside email addresses, a user in the organization. It gives you a bit of flexibility. That's the process, start to finish. I know it only takes about half an hour to get through it. It's pretty quick. One thing I do want to cover, and then I see some questions come in, and I'll talk about those here in a sec, is reporting. At any point in time, we can report on the different statuses, like I was showing earlier, ones that need to be reconciled, ones that need to be ordered, right? Pending approval, etc. But at any point in time, you can also create like your own search, like your own kind of report from scratch, and pull information based off of, like, let's say you want to see all requests submitted by me. So you can see all the requests and what I've requested. You can, again, use the printing tool to pull it straight to a PDF report if you like, right? You can pull it to Excel, and it's like, well, this guy requests every day. Someone talk to him. And so it gives you a little bit of flexibility to have canned reports, as well as building a report on the fly, right? Whether it be Excel or PDF. Okay, let's look at these questions. I know there was a question here. Okay, yeah, the first one. authors can see their own POs and or those their approvers. Yeah, okay. So the question is like, who can see what? And that's correct. So essentially, when you submit a purchase request, you know, talking about this portal and specifically, this is all equal to me, right? It's equal to, in this case, this account. So you can only see things equal to your account, right? So if I come into the same site under my account, my Brian account, it's a better way to say that, my personal account, there we go. I won't see requests or approvals, right? I don't have any pending, but we do here. So it's very specific to the user in which you're logged in as, right? And that's using your 365 login. So again, that's another point. We're not using multi-factor authentication, or we're using the multi-factor authentication already built into 365. It's just an extension of your 365 login, right? Second, can it interface with SAP? We have done an interface with SAP before. Talked about it briefly, but we have this invoke web service here on as part of our workflow tool. It gives you the ability to push and pull information from a third-party tool set into the SharePoint site to make it the system of truth. And for those that are interested on the .help site, there's a bit more information here. I'll put it in the, I'll answer this, I'll answer this question for everybody as well. So you can have it. And this is just a KV article. It's a good information for good system for information for us as well. It's our .help. It's just invoking the REST API components from NITRO and allows us to push and pull that information from the third-party ERP system. Okay, we have a custom TNC page printing in our current system, assuming we can integrate the PDF output so we can share with, TNC vendors. Absolutely. I mean, the great thing about, in my opinion, I think the great thing about using SharePoint, so let me kind of sum up the question for everybody, because I was mumbling and reading to myself, which I tend to do. Basically, the question is, you know, I want my vendors to be able to see the purchase orders, a consumable place, right, where we can give it to them and they can submit it or, you know, see it, consume it. And yeah, I think the great thing about SharePoint is that it's at the end of the day, it's shareable. It's what it's known for is data storage in a doc library, right? So whatever content we want to push out to vendors or to third parties, we can. It's just a matter of how we want to. Like, what does that workflow look like? And that's how I started the conversation is, you know, everyone's purchasing workflow is very specific to them. And I haven't done a purchasing implementation here that's been similar, you know, over, well, 7 years here and 3 years at a previous company. So verging on 10 years now. Doing this in SharePoint, it's like no one's been the same. So it's all possible, right? Like it's all doable. It just depends on what your workflow looks like. You know, when do we send it to the vendor? You know, does the PDF hit a doc library and we permission it specifically to a certain vendor based on their domain? I mean, all possible. It's just going to depend upon your specific requirements. And I think what we should do is just sit down and chat and kind of walk through that, what it'll look like, and start to flesh it out and how it can be applied to the system. And that goes for everybody. You know, I think when talking about purchasing specifically, sitting down and having a conversation and applying your requirements to the tool set is always the preferred method way forward. And if anyone who wants to have a private one-on-one conversation or a conversation with me and my development team, I'd be happy to do so. Just like Krista know, or Krista, do you have any slides that show that information, how they can get a hold of us?
Sure do. Let me get that pulled up here.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for me while Krista pulls that up?
Here's that info.
I don't see your screen, Krista. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
perfect. Now I see it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, shoot Krista a message, an email, and she'll contact with me or put you in contact with the right person. And then, yeah, we'll basically kind of walk through a little bit more nitty gritty instead of a high level overview of the purchasing request system. And like I said, start to map your requirements to the application. Yeah, I think that's the next step for everyone. And then we would talk about involving our new co-pilot, getting Microsoft co-pilot involved. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can involve here in the tool, in the purchase request application. Oh, one last question. Yeah, it's a good question. Are all customizations available through configuration of the product, or are there capabilities that require custom program and configure at additional cost, or both, I guess? Yeah, the answer is both. I mean, well, both generically. Let me respond in a bit more detail. NITRO Studio, the tool set we use to develop the application, is included with purchasing. You have the tool set to go out and do everything on your own. You don't need us. I haven't seen a whole lot of people be able to take it and run with it based off of, their, lack of knowledge around NITRO Studio if they haven't used it before, maybe some SharePoint limit, their knowledge of SharePoint, etc. So typically it's like we get it set up, and then we turn it over to the customer to manage. But like I said, some folks have been able to take it and run with it, and other people are like, I don't want to touch it. So it's kind of it could be one of the three. More often than not, it's a little column A, a little column B. It's a little customer, a little us, to get the end product in place. It's a good question though. Cool. Well, Chris, I don't have anything else. Anything else you want to pass along, or should we let him go?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, Ryan. I think this is a great peek, but as Ryan said, there's a ton more to dive into, and every organization is a little bit different. So I would definitely encourage you to shoot me an email at that hello@crowcanyon.com, and I'll be happy to get you set up with the right person. And appreciate everyone for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Krista.
Thanks, Ryan.